The Global Energy Leaders Podcast, episode 76.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to another edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. So good to have you. And we have back on today David Williams, and we are talking about blockchain technology and peer-to-peer trading of energy and some really exciting stuff. If you didn't hear David's interview, I don't know how. He was the most popular downloaded over like the last, 2, 3, 4 months in a row. It was quite astonishing. And so we brought him back on. We get into some really interesting stuff. Question of the day: peer-to-peer trading. Do you think this is something that will be allowed by utility companies in the U.S.? Would love to hear your thoughts. Ryan at globalenergymedia.com. That's Ryan at globalenergymedia.com. And without further ado, here is David Williams. Well, David, I'm looking at the stats here on the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, and the last 3 months, there's one episode that has gone above and beyond in downloads, and that is yours, my friend. So congratulations, and thanks for coming back on the show.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me. It's so exciting to see people are interested in this topic.
Yeah, if you could give us some tips on how to get more downloads per episode, we would appreciate that. I don't know if it's just having you on every episode or what the magic secret is there.
I'm not for sure.
Absolutely. Well, last time we talked about decentralization of the grid, and I really enjoyed that conversation. I think that's a conversation that needs to be had more often by a lot smarter people than myself, but get folks in here and really figure out what's going to happen over the next couple of decades with that. But today, we're going in a little bit different direction. We're going to talk about blockchain technology. So set that up for us, for the listeners who may not be familiar with that. What do we mean when we say that term? And let's just go from there.
Yeah, blockchain is kind of this idea of a distributed ledger, so that all of the information exists with all of the participants kind of at the same time. So it's an interesting mechanism that really makes it difficult for someone to cheat the system. But because it's completely distributed, it is a challenge for a lot of the regulatory environments. And so we're starting to see that. There was news this past week about the Security and Exchange Commission starting to understand what it means when these companies are now offering these initial coin offerings, as they're called, with very large capital raises.
Okay, so when you said cheat the system, how would someone cheat the system by using blockchain technology?
Well, in a traditional system, everything is done in a centralized location, something could be done at that centralized location and affect all of the participants. In the blockchain system, you really have to affect more than half of the participants. So all of the information is stored at every individual wallet, let's say. So then you'd have to be able to make that change to more than half of the wallets, so that there would be your change would kind of reconcile back through all of them. Whereas in the system today, think about if someone at the bank made a change to your bank account at the bank, you would recognize that change. But in the blockchain world, they'd have to make that change to more than half of all of the accounts for it to be reconciled.
Okay, and so what are some of the pros and cons of having to do it like that?
Well, the benefit of having a fully deregulated system, and we can talk specifics to energy, is that it will allow a peer-to-peer network to exist where resources exist on the grid and loads exist on the grid, and they're able to trade between one another. And the benefit of that has got a lot of big ramifications that we can kind of dive into, whereas the traditional model has been kind of more of the centralized large generation, large transmission, large distribution to individual loads at the edge of that grid.
Right. Now, when you say peer-to-peer trading, I'm thinking of stocks, I'm thinking of commodities. Just the word trading kind of invokes that, but I don't think that's exactly where you're going. So where are you going when you say the word peer-to-peer trading?
Yeah, so interestingly, I think what we've seen in California with the new net metering program, the Net Energy Metering 2.0, it's starting to push people to time of use rates. And those rates are kind of to align your electricity costs with the demand across the grid. That's a good thing. And I think that those behavioral changes around energy pricing will help sculpt the generation to meet the load. The challenge, I think, or what kind of the California piece is the right idea, but not nearly far enough, is that pricing is not dynamic. It's set through very long rate case policies around exactly what is considered peak and off-peak hours. What peer-to-peer trading would allow you to do is have real-time pricing for what is the value of the energy made at the, say, solar at your facility, or if you have a large power plant, what is the value of that at this very instant? And that allows you to be able to get more value for the system you're putting on the roof of your home or your business, and selling that energy directly to someone who is consuming at that same instant. The challenge of doing that today is the centralization of how do you make sure all of those transactions are being reconciled in real time. Just requires kind of a computing power nightmare, whereas the blockchain will allow for these peer-to-peer or smart contracts that self-verify. So it notices that the generator has generated electricity and the load has consumed it, and those are connected in that same contract, and that reconciles and the payments made without really clearing through a centralized repository.
Okay, so let me make a parallel here if I can, and maybe see if I'm following along. This sounds kind of like the net neutrality debate, and if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's saying like, okay, right now I have electricity running, and I'm paying the same thing my neighbor's paying. We're all paying the same, whether it's peak time or not. We're all paying the same, assuming we have the same company. And what you're saying is that if you want to use energy during peak time, you have to pay more for it because it's more in demand, right? Supply and demand, which is kind of the same thing with the net neutrality debate. Is okay. Well, you could allow Netflix to get there faster because they're paying more. Is that kind of how we should think about it?
Well, I think in parts, yes. I think the other side of that coin is the value to the distributed generator. And so today, it's very difficult for you as a homeowner or for a small business to participate in the demand response market, say, where the price of the kind of marginal price of energy is defined as the congestion and what it would cost for the grid to supply that energy at any one point. Whereas in this more kind of transactive grid or the peer-to-peer piece, an individual homeowner could then be compensated for turning their air conditioner off and participating in that demand response market. Demand response markets exist in many parts of the country today. California and New York have pretty established programs for that, but they've traditionally been held out for the larger consumers because they can demonstrate that shift in load better. What I think these transactive grids will allow to happen is because you don't need the computing power or the verification of tens of thousands of meters in one central repository, they're able to be done in a distributed nature. And then you can really pass along those savings to the individuals. Ultimately, then that allows for homeowners or business owners to really get more benefit from the renewable energy or storage that they have on site.
Okay, and so as a homeowner, you look at this and go, if the market dynamics changed, there could be some competitive advantage for a homeowner, but there also could be some disadvantages. Like we mentioned, that the pricing might not be geared towards you. But I think one thing that you're mentioning here, and maybe would be interesting to look at, is that if you went to a model that allowed more competition in the marketplace, that would mean that there could potentially be more avenues to get your energy from, which would then create more of a pricing, people actually competing for your energy. Whereas right now the system, at least where I'm at, it isn't really geared that way. Is that a possibility with some of this technology?
Yeah, I think if you look at it on a couple of different levels, one, yes, absolutely, that a kind of more deregulated market could allow for downward pressure on retail pricing. Where I think some of that benefit will come is that if there was more dynamic pricing in the time of use of either the energy you're putting back on the grid or the energy that you're consuming, better match the generation profiles, that's an efficiency gain by the whole system. And in California, we're probably 10, 15% over production at all times. Some of that's even being shunted to ground, but a lot of it is just spinning reserves waiting for anybody to be able to engage so that they can be serviced by that generator. So if we can better match the load profiles with the load of generators, it should lower the overall cost of retail rates for everyone. So not only would there be a competitive effect, there's just an efficiency in the system that would exist if you could price people effectively out of the market when it's a very expensive time to generate.
Yeah, and I guess if you look at kind of how at least in the U.S. things were operate. During the day, most U.S. homes, they set their thermostat or whatever to instead of 72, it's at 76. But if you thought, okay, well, this could create some advantages for me as a homeowner to put it to 78, when businesses actually need the most energy during that time of the day, you could actually see for businesses and consumers to look at how they consume energy completely different. But I guess one thing that I would want to know, especially as a homeowner or a business owner, is would there be ways for me to monetize this? So in other words, if I said, okay, well, you know what, I could get a smart thermostat, and from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. okay, and we really don't need it. We could run the AC at 85 and it wouldn't matter for us. Could I monetize that to lower my overhead costs as well?
Absolutely. And I think you've really just kind of nailed what I think the beginnings of this distributed grid market will look like. And I think the most important nuance to what we just described is that that's not a energy efficiency play of saving money. It could be an opportunity to actually make money. So in markets like California, where the cost is identified by the system operator of what it would cost to service that, and if you can demonstrate that you can turn off in aggregate, then you can participate in that market and effectively get a check in the mail for being uncomfortable. And I think we'll see that same phenomenon play out everywhere. And the reason it's taken some time is that the old methodology of centralized repositories is being replaced by these peer-to-peer contracts, which allows for the smart meters and things to be able to communicate in real time that allows those transactions to reconcile.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue is that it seems that conservationists and capitalists sometimes are on the opposite side of the coin. When really there is a lot of areas that they would like to work together, and if I can turn my energy consumption down and make money on it, well, okay, the conservationist is happy and I'm happy. If I turn it down and I save maybe $1, maybe $10, I save some arbitrary amount of money on my electricity bill that I don't know what I'm going to get. I don't have no idea what I'm going to do by sitting in 78 instead of 76. This actually changed the game, and I think what you'll see is a lot of interesting stuff. So if you look like Christmas time comes up, people who are going out and buying a bunch of Christmas gifts, they're probably going to make sure that they run their electricity very smart to pay them credit card bills off when it comes January.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's where this is the real engagement of people with their electricity bill. There's only a few minutes that people spend every year thinking about energy, and I don't see that changing dramatically, but I do see that with the connected homes and more intelligent devices in people's homes, your refrigerator will be making choices and your washing machine will be making choices that helps to either save you money or in some cases make money. And one I think is a good example is having solar panels on your roof. During the daytime, those solar panels may be in a position to be kind of bidding into the market as a generator. And in places like where I live in California, we have pretty strong microclimates. It can be sunny and warm, and 10 miles away be cold and foggy. And in those markets, the cold and foggy resident may be buying directly from the warm and sunny resident and paying directly. And I think that is not 20 years away. I think that technology is on the verge of happening today. And in some markets where that's being stood up in a regulatory environment, we're maybe only a few years away from having real transactive grids in the United States.
Well, it's funny that you brought up that solar panel on the house. I was talking to some fellows the other day, and I said, if I knew that I could put on solar panels onto my house right now, there's none on my street, and I live in a gated community, and I don't know if there's any in the community. There's a lot of houses, so maybe there is, but I haven't seen any. But if I knew I could put them on and I could sell my excess to my neighbors, I would do it because I would make back my money a lot quicker than having to rely on a credit or balancing my bill out and all this stuff. But I can't, so therefore it's like, okay, well, I look at it, I go, over 10 years, I'll make it back. That's assuming they don't get tore up or anything. But this, I think, really changes how people would look at solar panels on their house or on their business or anything once you realize that you can monetize what you do. Now, eventually, you say, well, everyone might do that. Okay, but we're not there right now. And I think that also would spur solar entrepreneurs to come out and figure out how to make more efficient solar panels and more efficient in what they're doing because now they're saying, okay, the increase in demand. So I think it's just good all the way around.
I think so. And I think, exactly what you described is where I think the market's going with we're kind of accelerated the fact that products like energy storage have really been difficult because it is hard to identify how fast you get the energy storage to pay back because it requires a pretty deep perspective on when you're using power and what the value will be at that time. That model that you just described where you can sell to your neighbors, what would it look like then if you could put a battery in your basement and then be able to sell, renewable energy or energy just period to your neighbors at a point where the energy is no longer available? And so then you are helping to stabilize the grid. You may be putting the battery in your basement and helping to change some utility characteristics at the edge of the grid that's very difficult to do from the large centralized generators. So I think it's good not just all the way around from an economic standpoint, but I think that it does build a more resilient grid and really benefits the utility who struggles sometimes on how to make those changes to making sure that the voltage is strong in your neighborhood without impacting someone else.
No, absolutely. And I love ideas like this because, again, you can look at it and say, okay, we're trying to be environmentally friendly on some level, and we're trying to be capitalist. I'm a free markets guy, as I said on the show many times. I want people to have clean energy as best they can and cheap and affordable. And I don't really have a dog in the hunt on how it gets there. The market should dictate this, and opening this up would allow the market to sit back and to evaluate this. But I think one of the problems you might see here, at least in the U.S., is the big utility companies, I think they're going to want to push back on this. What has been their take on this so far?
Well, I think that the utility companies the face of the utility companies are changing, particularly in California. We've seen the rise of the community choice aggregators, and they are taking a lot of what have traditionally been utility customers, and the statistics are continuing to move. But I think the large utilities are recognizing that within the next 5 years that they may have no customers and that they will be a distribution company. And I don't think that that's a negative thing. And in fact, it may be better that these local providers are filling that consumer-facing role. What I think then it looks a lot like we see in some international markets where you have the role of a distributor whose job is to make sure that electrons are going where they're supposed to and that it's in a safe and clean manner. Then that is a regulated business that is kind of is guaranteed a return through kind of their ratepayer cases. And then the competition happens on either sides of the generation side or the consumer-facing retail side. But overall, I think in that market, we'll see lower retail rates for everyone.
Well, I'm glad you said international because that's why I wanted to go next. Just while we have a few minutes here, is thinking about this from an international perspective. If you can go out to developing nations and start to put on solar panels, and not only could you provide power for your house or warm water for your house. Eventually, maybe if there's a need, you could sell that back to the market. That's good for those kind of economies that are emerging. They're trying to figure out how to get back in. We talked about decentralization last time. It seems like ideas like this, if you look at it, go, okay, well, we could decentralize a U.S. market or parts of the U.S. market, while these emerging markets are being never are centralized. I should say they grew up with an economic view of energy that we would have to catch up to them on because this is all they've ever known, and we're trying to rethink how we look at stuff.
Absolutely. And I think we've already seen that in some cases. The distributed payment platforms in parts of Africa really are far advanced from what we have here, where even in small rural markets, you're able to buy produce on your phone and send payments in real time and receive them in real time. And that's been customary probably for the better part of the last 10 years and widespread for the last 5. And I think we'll see something very similar in energy. For very similar reasons. It's expensive and it can be risky, and the kind of political uncertainty in some of these contexts make it hard to raise third-party capital or even institutional capital to build $1 billion power plant and then the transmission and distribution that would be necessary to get that to individual customers. We've also seen the challenges in a lot of the kind of peri-urban environments in Africa, particularly where there's an undergrid problem, where individuals live directly below the grid but don't have the $2,000 or $3,000 connection fee that would be necessary. And I think that this decentralized role would allow both those peri-urban customers to participate, as well as reaching into rural environments that the grid just really isn't physically ever going to be able to extend towards. And even if you were, would the economics of the old school, centralized, very large capital purchase of generation and transmission be able to serve those markets effectively?
Well, we've covered a lot, and I enjoyed it as always. Let me ask you this. Is there a spot that maybe a listener could go, they say, I want to learn more about this, maybe a position paper or a book that you would recommend, maybe someone on Twitter they could follow that talks about this on a regular basis, so until we talk again, they can kind of learn more about what we've discussed today?
Sure. There's a few large groups that are doing good work, particularly around blockchain. I think one is the Rocky Mountain Institute has been working on a world meter program There are a few private companies, one called Grid Singularity and another called Leap in the US, that are focused on these energy solutions, primarily around decentralized grid. And I think, from a lot of the things we've talked about here, that although renewables play a very significant role in that this decentralized piece is much broader and not specific to renewables. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that and the world meter programs that are these protocols that will eventually someday allow every device in your home to talk to every other device on an open source platform.
Okay, great. And before we let you go, David, where can people connect with you or find out more about what you have going on? Anything else that you want to plug or promote?
Sure. Yeah, you can get a hold of me at my email, which is Dave at dissigno, DAVE at dissigno.com. And you can follow me on Twitter as well.
All right. Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes. And David, thanks for coming on. Always enjoy the discussion, and look forward to having you on again in a few months when you reclaim your title as the most downloaded guy for 2 or 3 months in a row, or whatever it is. Okay.
All right. Well, here's hoping. Thank you so much.
The Global Energy Leaders podcast is produced by Michael Sims and Chris Prine. Chris Prine also serves as editor for the Global Energy Leaders podcast. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders podcast, powered by R Squared Global.